Hey everybody, this is Jimmy, and you're watching JimmyAmericaPhoto because you were looking for one of DoKashiteru's videos and you got turned around at the subscription page and you ended up here. But that's okay, I can be just as entertaining as that guy. See? Watch. Hey Lamp.
Hey Jimmy,
What you up to?
nothing much. Just about to take a bath.
Well, that doesn't sound like a very bright idea.
Why do I date you?
I don't get it either. That guy's got so many subscriptions. We have finally arrived at the long-awaited, much-anticipated manual mode video. Woo! For this episode, you will need to know how to adjust your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO. Now, we've covered these in previous videos. As you can see, they're floating over our faces. So you might want to watch those videos first to reacquaint yourself with how to do that. I'm also going to be talking a little bit about metering in this video, and that's a topic that we actually haven't covered yet, but I will cover it in the future. That's okay, you can still get by without knowing all there is to know about metering. We just need to be able to change your camera to spot metering mode, and I'll tell you how to do that. Who remembers their fire triangle from when they were in the Scouts? You weren't in the Scouts. For those of you who don't know what the fire triangle is, you've got your fuel, your ignition source, and oxygen. Without these three things, you can't have fire, and that forms the fire triangle. Well, there's also an exposure triangle, and without these three things, ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, you can't have a properly exposed photo.
Are you sure the exposure triangle isn't creepy guy, trench coat, white van?
That's not better than my lamp joke.
It's hilarious.
And if you've been watching the series, you know that each one of those things has its advantages and disadvantages, which Violet will now explain.
I will not, because I've forgotten. A wider aperture lets more light in, but makes the depth of field much shallower. A faster shutter speed will freeze action quickly, but will let in much less light, so you'll need a wider aperture.
Or higher ISO.
Yes, upping the ISO will let you keep the same aperture and shutter speed that you want to use, but it will make things more grainy.
Good work. So as you can see, with cameras, every single time you adjust something, you gain something, but you also lose something. So that's why knowing what each one of these does and how it interacts with the other two options is important for learning how to use manual mode on your camera, which is a great mode. It's really good, and it allows you to have all kinds of creative flexibility.
I look forward to you proving that.
I will. Okay, so let's get right into this. We've got our camera here, and the first thing that I want to do is change it to spot metering. Changing your camera's metering mode is actually very simple to do. On the D7000, which is what I'm shooting with, you've got this button on top here. You just hold it down, and you turn the reel dial one stop until it looks like it's a little polka dot. So it kind of looks like a squarish, roundish boob next to a square boob.
Stay classy, James!
I also like to make sure that I have my camera in single point focusing mode, because there's a bunch of other focusing modes, but single point lets you get your subject in focus. And to do that on the D7000, you've got this weird button here, which doesn't actually look like a button, but it is. You just hold that down and you turn the front dial until it's just one little pixel. And there you go, one squarish roundish boob next to one square boob.
You're so classy.
I know. All this means is that when you look through your viewfinder,
Ooh.
you're going to see one square, and where that square is, it's going to be focusing, and it's going to be metering. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So you're following at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not just saying, She totally is, but that's okay. As long as you're following along at home. Now, scoot your fine ass back over that side. I'm going to take your photo. Oh, that's a lovely pose. The first thing that you have to do when you're using manual mode, well, other than making sure it's in spot metering and single point focusing, and actually turning your camera to M, so it's in manual mode. I kind of glossed over that part, but it's kind of integral to the thing. Okay, as I was saying, first thing that you have to do is decide if you're going to be freezing action or if you're going for a shallow depth of field. For portrait, she's not moving around, so I don't have to worry about freezing action all that much. I'm going for shallow depth of field. So that means that I have to pick an aperture that I want. So I like to use a very shallow depth of field because I'm a shallow depth of field kind of shooter. So I'm going to go with 2.8. So as I lift in my lens, I'm going to move my focus point to one of your eyes. When you're taking a portrait, a good idea is to always focus on the eyes because of nature. That's where people look. first. So, you know, always focus on the eyes.
You should turn your hat from James mode to photographer mode.
I completely forgot.
That's the most important step ever.
That is the most important step.
You have to turn your hat from the front way to the back way so it goes into photographer mode.
Exactly.
Otherwise you can't take photos and look like you're from the 90s.
Exactly. It won't work. It just won't work. She's wearing her beret to be artistic today.
Exactly. I can't be a model unless I have a beret to be artistic.
Exactly. Now on my camera, when you're in manual mode, you can adjust the aperture by turning this front command dial. And you adjust your shutter speed by turning the rear command dial. Then you adjust your ISO by holding down the ISO button on the back and then changing the rear command dial. I also have an optional battery grip which allows me to do the exact same thing when I'm holding the camera in portrait position. So, aperture on the front, shutter speed on the back, and ISO by holding it down. Okay, so I'm going to hold it up. I'm going to move my focus point, which is just one square, to your eye. As I look through my eyepiece, I can see down the bottom there's a little bar with a plus on one side, a 0 in the middle, and a negative sign on the other side. And then other bars that just keep moving up and down. This is your exposure meter. And as you move your metering position from bright areas, such as that lamp, to dark areas like a shadow, the little bars underneath the plus, the 0, and the minus are going to change. Now for a properly exposed photo, you want those little bars down below to be all under 0. So what you have to do is either adjust your shutter speed or your ISO. Now the higher your ISO, the grainier your image will be, so I want to keep that as low as I can. So what I'm going to start by doing is adjusting my shutter speed down. So I'm going to go down, 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 down. And at 1/25th of a second, it becomes properly exposed. 1/25th of a second is actually kind of slow for a shutter speed.
That's pretty slow.
It doesn't sound very slow, it doesn't sound super slow, but if you've got shaky hands like me, 1/25th of a second is probably a bit too slow to get a nice, crisp, clean image. So instead, I'm going to up my ISO from 100 to say 400. 400 is not so bad, it's not going to have too much grain. Now I am way overexposed at 1/25th of a second, so that means that I can make that faster, 1/100th of a second. Shadazy!
Very nice.
See, you got a nice bit of blur out of focus on the hair, but your eyes nice and in focus. That's a good starting point for a photo.
I want to try.
Enthusiasm, that's what I like. Okay, I'm going to mess up these settings for you, and you're going to take a photo of me.
You're going to try to look more attractive.
I don't know if I can do that, because I'm so damn attractive, as it is.
That's it. Give me the camera.
Okay, so what are you going to do first?
Zoom out.
You can't do that with this lens. Remember, the first thing that you have to do is decide if you want to use a fast shutter speed to freeze action, or if you want to use a wide or narrow aperture for the depth of field.
I want a shallow depth of field because you're really close.
Okay, so you have to adjust your aperture so it's at its lowest value.
It's really hard to do this with nails.
Oh, I can imagine.
3.2.
Yeah, you can keep going if you want shallow depth of field. Well, you take it down to 1.4.
1.4.
1.4.
Camera is the heaviest thing in the world, by the way.
How's your exposure bar down the bottom?
All the way at minus.
It's all the way at minus. Okay, so you're going to want to adjust the dial on the back until it moves more towards the middle.
I have 125, f1.6, 0 or just below 0, and ISO 100, and a little lightning sign.
No, well that sounds pretty good. Why don't you try taking a photo?
It's not working.
And that's properly exposed!
Hooray!
You did it!
I did it because I'm a genius at cameras.
And it wasn't that hard, was it?
It was not that hard, except that the camera is really heavy.
Okay, but see, with your camera, it's nice and light, and you can still use manual mode on your little camera.
That's not actually that hard.
It's not actually that hard. See? Proven! Do the proven dance.
It was
Do
a
the
little
proven
hard.
dance. And now I'll explain how to take a photo of someone if they are moving. Okay, we took a little break for lunch, so now Violet has all the energy of 1,000 horses to dance the night away. There's a reason we never went to nightclubs. So I have to pick a shutter speed that's going to be fast enough to be able to freeze Violet mid-dance, but also an aperture and an ISO that's going to let in enough light so it's not going to be a really dark photo. As a rough guess, I'm just going to start off with a shutter speed of 125th of a second. Mainly because that's a pretty fast shutter speed, and that's what my camera was already on. So dance, Violets, dance like the wind! At 125th and 3.5, which is the widest aperture I can go to, it says that's going to be very underexposed. Yes, very underexposed. Keep dancing. I didn't say you could stop, slave.
I'm so tired.
So if we move the shutter speed down to a 30th of a second, which is where it says it's in the middle, right underneath the 0, it looks like...
It's perfect like champ.
It actually shows quite a bit of motion. So it's not a bad photo, it conveys motion. Say I wanted to actually freeze everything pin sharp. I'm going to put my shutter speed up to around 200. And because 3.5 is the widest aperture that I could possibly use with this lens, it means that I'm gonna have to up the ISO. Alrighty, let's do this again.
Let's dance.
Dance!
Let's dance.
Let's dance! Okay, so I'm looking through, ISO is going up, up, up. And at 800, it says that it's good. Frozen! Look at Violet dance. Dance, Violet, dance. But at an ISO of 800, it is a little bit grainy. But that's the trade-off that you have to make. Sometimes if you want to get that shot, you have to use that. And of course, as I mentioned in the ISO video, grain is something that you can fix post-production in Photoshop, if you have it, or whatever other application you're using.
Yay!
Whoa!
Photoshop.
Photoshop! I don't know why I'm talking like this. So, I'm gonna take it out of photography mode. Ready? Ready?
James, when did you get here?
I have no idea! Where am I?
You keep having these blackouts and you wake up and there's just photos everywhere.
Okay, to sum things up, when you put your camera in manual mode, you have control over your ISO, your aperture, and your shutter speed. When you look through the viewfinder of your camera, you should be able to see your aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO, as well as your exposure bar or meter. A properly exposed photo is going to be right in the middle of the plus and minus of your exposure bar, right below the 0. Using single point focusing and spot metering will give you the most accurate reading on your exposure bar. Before you take the photo, you need to decide if you want to worry about the depth of field or freezing action. If you're doing portraits, I'd say go with depth of field. If you're taking photos of people playing sports or walking around on the street, I'd say go with changing your shutter speed. So let's say you're going to take a photo of your friend. As I said with portraits, they don't move around too much, so don't worry about freezing fast action. We're going to go with opening up your aperture. Decide how blurry you want it to be. Remember with apertures, lower numbers means blurrier backgrounds, higher numbers means more in focus. Then move the focus point to their eyes. Once your focal point is over the eye, check your exposure bar and see if it's leaning more towards plus or minus. If it's leaning more towards plus, that means that your photo is overexposed and you need to use a faster shutter speed. If it's leaning towards minus, it's underexposed and you need a slower shutter speed so you can let in more light. If you're using a shutter speed of 1/30th of a second and it's still saying it's underexposed, I wouldn't recommend lowering it anymore because then it's going to start to get blurry as your hand moves. So instead, up your ISO and maybe change your shutter speed to around 1/60th of a second. Once your exposure bar is right in the middle underneath 0, you're good to go. If it's still coming out a little bit dark, feel free to overexpose a little bit and make it a little bit brighter. I do it all the time, like all the time. Usually all of my photos are overexposed because I prefer high heat over low heat.
Yay!
Yay! Let's say you wanted to take a photo of a flower on a really windy day. In this case, you would be worried more about shutter speed over your aperture. So pick a shutter speed that's fast enough to freeze the action, probably around 200th of a second. Move the focus point to the flower and check your exposure meter to see if you're over or under. If you're overexposed, use a narrower aperture, and if you're underexposed, use a wider aperture. If you're at your widest aperture and it's still too dark, up your ISO. And that's it, take the photo. It's really easy. See, once you explain all these things, it is actually really easy to use. And it's great, that's why I always leave my camera either in manual mode or aperture mode if I need to take a quick photo and I don't have time to worry about settings. And that's manual mode on your camera. When a lot of people find out how to actually use it, they're like, oh man, why wasn't I using this the entire time?
Exactly.
Yes, especially if you're going to be using off-camera flashes, manual mode is very important.
I don't use off-camera flashes, but I'm going to give it a try anyway.
And I hope you do too. That's going to be your homework. You were going to say goodbye prematurely, weren't you?
No.
No. Oh, okay. Get out your camera right now find something that you want to take a photo of and try and take a photo of it using manual mode.
Good luck!
Good luck! It does take a little bit of getting used to, but once you know how to do it and you're a little bit more comfortable with what a specific shutter speed and a specific aperture are going to look like, it becomes very easy and second nature to just adjust these things on the fly.
It just takes a little bit of practice. Just start now.
Exactly! Practice makes perfect and you will get it. So, thank you very much for watching. Next week we're actually going to discuss metering modes, which I should have discussed before this video, but don't worry about that because, yeah, it's easy.
We'll be at the coast next week, so no we won't.
No! Oh, that's right. Okay, never mind.
Next week we will be at the Sunshine Coast, so you probably won't get a video because we'll be too busy
Exploring all the wonders that the
and
Sunshine
eating
Coast has to offer.
cheese.
Oh, we're going to a cheese factory, and a chocolate factory, and a nut factory, and a giant pineapple.
Yeah, it's all
never-
about food.
I've never been to the giant pineapple, so I'm looking.
It's called the Big Pineapple.
Oh, it's called the big. We're going to the big pineapple.
Anyway, so we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
I'll see you in a couple of weeks. I'll take some video while I'm up there, but I won't have time to edit it, so no video next week, but the week after that, metering modes. Bye!
Bye!
Oh, there's glitter all over my eyepiece now.
That's why I don't use DSLRs, because they mess up my makeup. And then you'll probably end up with wrinkles on one side because you're squinting trying to get your eye in it. Do you want me to have a lopsided, wrinkly face when we're old, James? Just wrinkles over one side of my face? That's gonna look pretty ridiculous, thanks.
I suppose not.
Damn straight.
Women are weird.